Welcome to episode 53 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hey there.
Hey, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode, new ones are normally out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite platform to get the latest first, and please do rate and review us. You can also drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic and our guest for this episode.
The federal government's role in leading the charge against cyber threats has long been a point of discussion, and while cybersecurity policy has been sporadic at best in the past, in recent months especially, Washington has turned its focus onto the threat landscape.
To go over some of the latest measures coming from the Biden administration and Congress, and where they stand, we welcome someone whose focus is on covering federal cybersecurity policy for NextGov, Mariam Baksh. Mariam, thanks very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. And let's just start with some of the most recent developments in this subject area first. So just this week, as we record this, the White House held a summit focusing on sort of the public-private partnership on cybersecurity. Tell us first sort of how that came together.
I'm not in the White House, so I don't know exactly how they pulled it off, but I don't think it would have been too hard to invite a bunch of private companies to say, tout what they're doing for cybersecurity and have the White House also say, I think the quote was, "We're stressing cybersecurity more than ever." It makes everybody look good. So as far as how specifically it came together, I imagine it's just a simple ask. But they have been working on it. They flagged that they were going to be doing a meeting like this about a month ago.
Okay.
To answer your question a little more seriously, I guess, like you were saying, we have seen more of a focus in the last couple of months, and I think it's hard for anyone to ignore breaches like SolarWinds, Kaseya, Colonial. It goes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the breaches, the attacks have lended some urgency and maybe potential shifting sands that we haven't seen before. But, I say that's like being pretty generous because, we've seen hacks before when every time it happens, everybody says this is outrageous. And then we have the same old debates. And, there are some new things that this administration is doing, but at the bottom of it are the same old debates, unfortunately, in my opinion.
Right. I was about to say, this is not the first time we've seen this sort of private companies coming together. Is this really more of a concrete step, or is this just kind of one more baby step in a direction we've already been heading for a while?
I think the meeting itself was like a show, but there are certain things that came out in terms of the commitments that I think are a little bit more significant than others might assume. So, when the meeting finished, we saw the announcements come out. Well, Google is going to spend $10 billion improving their security and spending this much to do training programs for employees. And Microsoft is going to spend $20 billion to improve their security and to, quote unquote, accelerate the development of more security products, which sounds like they're just creating more profit avenues, right? But my point is, these are sort of the things that a lot of people say, well, they should be doing anyway, right? They need to train their workers anyway. And it's not at all spelled out how that money is going to be spent, although it sounds like a lot. And it sounds like a lot, that they're doing for cybersecurity. And so therefore, the government doesn't need to mandate regulations, which, there is an appeal for with the prevalence of these attacks. One thing that I did think was a little bit more significant that others might have overlooked is the fact that insurance companies are going to be at the table with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, when they draft this software development technology design framework. It's very frustrating because this is the umpteenth framework that we've seen NIST tasked with developing. And they already have a software development white paper. So in my opinion, and I don't know if you invited me on here to spout my opinion, it's kind of cool because I don't get to do that in my articles.
Share away, yeah.
Yeah. But so it's not, in my opinion, there's not a lack of information for how to conduct secure software development, So it's just like, okay, well, NIST is doing it again with the companies right there. NIST is always working with companies. That's their whole mission operandi, like their whole raison d'etre. But I do think that it's interesting that insurance companies are going to be at the table when drafting this framework, because the main approach we've seen across administrations, political administrations, Republicans, Democrats, they all want to do what they can to avoid mandates. And so insurance has been seen forever as the way to create a market incentive without creating some sort of requirement, and have that a sort of organic force in the market. And so the idea is that insurance companies will sort of require certain things of companies before they provide them coverage, certain things like certain cybersecurity practices, the implementation of certain cybersecurity practices. And so it'll be interesting because that's been more of a conversation in terms of enterprises that want to get insured. But when you're talking about building products from the beginning, building more secure and better technology, to have the insurance companies there too, I thought was a little bit interesting, if not a monumental $10 billion investment.
Yeah, I mean, in the last 6 to 12 months, especially on this show, we've talked about cybersecurity, insurance, and its impact overall. So it's a pretty hot button issue of whether this is a help or a harm. Even.
Yeah. You mean whether it's cybersecurity insurance in general is a help or a harm?
Right.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's topsy-turvy right now, and a pivotal moment, especially with ransomware driving premiums up and coverage down. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I have been hearing that the same ransomware threat is pushing insurance companies to do more due diligence about the security, about checking the security of the entities that they sell premiums to, instead of just saying, "Ooh, it's a new premium. I don't care what their security is. They're paying us."
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of the increased attacks is sort of driving the industry in two different directions, or multiple directions. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the end. Maybe it destroys the industry, or maybe what doesn't kill you makes you stronger,
Yeah, I mean, and when we talk about all of this with, a framework that maybe the cyber insurance companies are generally behind, is there some way outside of an actual, federal mandate to require all of the cyber insurance companies to fall into line here, or would we see sort of a split between some?
I think one of the complicating things about this is the fact that insurance is regulated at the state level. So what we've seen from the federal side, going back to 2016, a couple of years ago, was this effort to collect information about companies' cybersecurity, not just when incidents happen, but what their protections are in place, and the nitty-gritty of the incidents, so that they can actually connect successful attacks with cybersecurity practices, and then shape policies based on that. And so there was an effort dating back to the Obama administration. Again, Republicans and Democrats kind of agreed we should create this repository. Probably it's CISA, right? Now CISA, definitely DHS, and even at that time, where companies can sort of pool all of this information, and that'll give insurance companies a better way to gauge how they should price policies. And it fell apart because of companies' sort of anxiety that information will be used against them in other ways. And so they wanted to keep it anonymous. And then experts were suggesting that, well, if it's anonymous, it doesn't really, lend itself to creating those effective I can never pronounce that word, actuarial tables that insurance companies use, to really that's their business, right? Their bread and butter is based on these very nuanced sort of data points. And so it fell apart. And now there's the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, which is this mandated body made up of government, Congress people and private sector leaders, and as well as, agency officials. And that Solarium Commission recommended the creation of a cyber statistics bureau, which would, again, it's the same idea, collect all of this information and then put it towards, having insurance companies be able to price it better. And again, I think one of the fears from industry is like, well, it'll be used to inform regulations, more specific regulations. I think a lot of things, something a lot of people miss, maybe not you guys because you've been doing this a while, but like the current NIST cybersecurity framework that forms the basis of cyber policy right now is completely voluntary. And it's not just like, you can take up like this framework tells you what to do. The framework gives you a ton of choices about what to do based on your risk appetite. So someone can say, I've been using the framework and based on my risk appetite, which is I'm very hungry for risk, I've decided I don't need to implement half of these controls or even 3/4 of them, So I think there's an effort now with the Stats Bureau and through insurance companies, even having a place like MITRE, a federally funded research and development corporation, which sort of has more of a institutional heft, I would say, have them sort of collect the work that states have done to form their policies around insurance and then have sort of a federal, template for folks to go on. So that's kind of where we are in terms of like what the federal government is trying to do. The thing is with the Cyber Stats Bureau is like it didn't make it into the NDAA, the last NDAA, when a lot of other provisions did from the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. And, the National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis, he's a big supporter of it, but it doesn't sound like he has full backing of the White House on it yet, based on some remarks that he made recently. So that might be neither here nor there, but I do know that there's pushback on that Stats Bureau, more pushback on that than some of the other, and for reasons that it might lead to, mandating cyber insurance for federal contractors, for example.
As I understand it from the piece you wrote in August, part of this fight over the Bureau of Cyber Statistics is where exactly to, I guess, house it agency-wise. You mentioned there's the Department of Commerce versus Department of Homeland Security. What are some of the differences being argued over there?
Yeah, so you're right. Commerce and DHS are the primary sort of places that it would be housed. And they're pretty similar in that both are sort of would take a non-regulatory approach or would signal a commitment to taking more of a non-regulatory approach. Companies that would consider contributing to these efforts want assurances that the government isn't going to use that information to create regulations. Right. So like with Commerce and DHS both having a non-regulatory mission, or at least touting a non-regulatory mission, they seem pretty similar to me. There's nuanced arguments about like, well, Commerce has done this kind of thing before, and then DHS being sort of like tasked with the cybersecurity protection of federal government. So I think people are pretty split. The community is pretty split on one or the other of those for it to be housed. I bet no one would want to see it housed at like the SEC, or the FCC or something like that.
Yeah, so going back a little bit to the National Cybersecurity Director position, as you mentioned, something that recently created. So what does that role look like it's going to really do? You mentioned CISA already, for instance. So we've had some sort of federal cybersecurity presence already, but what will CISA fall under? What is the National Cybersecurity Director going to have in terms of power, would you say?
That is another sort of controversial area. The National Cyber Director proposal, that effort was the main thing that the Solarium Commission wanted to get over. And I think part of that is because the National Cyber Directors envisioned as being sort of this way to really not represent, but advocate for the interests of the private sector and bridge the federal government with the private sector in terms of going forward with cybersecurity policy, and to advocate for budgetary needs of the federal government in terms of cybersecurity. And this is the way that Senator Angus King described it famously. He said that the National Cyber Director provides one neck to choke for the president, with all of these different agencies having some stake in cybersecurity. There's FBI, in addition to CISA, in addition to Commerce, and, you name it, state, everybody, right? And so with the push to have a national cyber strategy and to sort of get more coherence around all of this, I think one of the big ideas behind having the national cyber director is to just the president can go across the hall to someone in the executive office of this, in his executive office, and be like, what's the deal with this,
Right.
Like Jen Easterly at CISA, the director of CISA, yes, she also has the responsibility of overseeing federal agencies' cybersecurity, but she's not in the White House with the president,
It's kind of another station for the buck to stop at on its
way around.
It's kind of like the last stop, I think, is how it was envisioned anyway. But there's there are certain limitations that others have pointed out, in terms of balancing the amount of money that goes to cyber offense over cyber defense, for example. As you can imagine, the Defense Department, which does a lot of this cyber offense, has a lot of money and personnel, right? And we don't really see a lot of what they do. We hear snippets of it, like them closing down that Russian misinformation office around the election, stuff like that. And, we'll hear once in a while, oh, that's what they've been working on. Then we know, right? But yeah, I'm not knocking it. Could be very effective, but there's a criticism that we spend an outsized amount on offense that's not always disclosed, frankly, than we do on defense. And, if you're going to have an advocate for cybersecurity defense in the budget process, then that person needs to have jurisdiction over the Pentagon as well. And the NCD doesn't. The National Cyber Director doesn't.
Right. And I imagine a lot of, the hesitation on the federal defense side is because it often does involve the private sector just like this. And as you said earlier, nobody wants to make a mandate here.
Yeah, when I say nobody wants to make a mandate, I am talking about the industries who would have to follow the mandates and the policymakers who don't want to ruffle their feathers. I don't know. Or find it difficult for whatever reason politically. I'm not talking about consumers who might benefit from this, from mandates, or, we often talk about industry as a monolith and industry doesn't want regulations. And I'm certainly guilty of that, but it's totally not when you come to cybersecurity, right? Like when you talk about those supply chain attacks, for example, I bet there are a number of companies who would like to see SolarWinds have had stronger requirements in place for their software development processes, so that they wouldn't be where they are after that attack,
Right.
Yeah, plenty to unpack with all of this, definitely. And where can people find more of what you're writing as we follow all of these issues?
Our site is NextGov.com. It's brilliant. We have our own podcast, Critical Update. Okay. Sorry, is it bad taste to plug our own podcast on your podcast?
Absolutely, no problem.
And, in case you're interested, or folks out there are interested in the broader field that I cover, because there is so much, right? Agencies, we just did a podcast on quantum computing, and it sounds like some sort of faraway concern, but the folks I was talking to said this is actually pretty urgent. So on top of everything we just talked about, there's also these other concerns you have to sort of deal with in the back of your mind, not to mention position navigation timing and GPS and all, it's just huge. But if you want to track what I'm covering and you like my style, I guess you can go to NextGov.com. And my colleagues are also on top of all of the federal contracting and information technology federal government side. So it'll be good for you if you care about that stuff.
Great. Well, we appreciate you joining us. Thank
you again for having me. It was fun.
Now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a closer look at the top stories in the cybersecurity world and discuss what they may mean to you. We'll start with headline number 1. updating the T-Mobile data breach story. That's not really the headline of the story, but there's so much to update that we figured that would be a good way of summing it up. So the most recent development, we got on the horn about this data breach story just before it got really fully confirmed as a breach.
Yeah, during our last episode, as we talked about it, it was still an up in the air, as supposedly there's some T-Mobile data out there for sale on the dark web, not quite sure what happened, and now the CEO is coming forward to apologize. Company is sending out notifications, and surprisingly, the hacker behind it all has stepped forward to talk as well.
Yeah, so a few developments since we were last on. So really, we'll start with the CEO side of things, because this actually was one of the latest developments, which in some ways is maybe not the best, considering T-Mobile did acknowledge the breach a few days before the CEO said anything. But Mike Sievert partially tried to downplay the incident a little bit by noting that no financial information was lost. But what's the but there?
The but was that they lost Social Security, driver's license information, and I believe birthdays, street addresses, the whole 9 yards short of financial info. As you said, the CEO kind of played it down a little bit, saying that it was much like so many breaches before, which he should know because this is what, their fourth or fifth one for T-Mobile.
Yeah. They've got a little experience, unfortunately. So a total of 50 million people had apparently a huge amount of information lost. 48 million of those included Social Security numbers. Yeah, these are large chunks of folks who are having some pretty personal information out there.
Right, and we also discussed last episode that you and I are both T-Mobile customers, and I can confirm that I got the text about this all. So if you are a T-Mobile customer as well and have been notified, congratulations, you get 2 more years of identity protection if you didn't already have that.
Which you already had if you were a T-Mobile customer before,
right.
Knowing that, knowing what we know. But yeah, I think we talked about getting the text, and I think that was even a little bit on the late side of this story being confirmed out in the public. So, it's one thing to get breached all the time, and then the other side of it is you really want to show that you're doing something about it as soon as people hear about it. So probably not the best handling of things so far.
Yeah, the CEO did say on his behalf that behalf of everyone of Team Magenta, I want to say we are truly sorry. I wasn't familiar with Team Magenta before this, so I guess that must be an insider thing.
That's the name of their plans are Magenta, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. They also have announced a new deal with a cybersecurity company called Mandiant. It sounds like they are helping them with the incident response and the aftermath of this breach, and I suppose going to be moving forward, helping them out with beefing up their security further to prevent number 5.
And just going through some more numbers on this particular data breach. So another 40 million former or prospective customers. Wouldn't you love that if you were just a prospective customer to have your name, date of birth, social security number, and driver's license leaked? More than 5 million current postpaid customer accounts also had information like names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, and some other personal plan related information and phone number information illegally accessed. And another 667,000 accounts of former T-Mobile customers had their information stolen, alongside a group of 850,000 active T-Mobile prepaid customers whose names, phone numbers, and account PINs were exposed. And the names of 52,000 people with Metro by T-Mobile accounts may also have been accessed, according to T-Mobile. So if you've ever said the words T-Mobile, you might have had something exposed in this breach.
Now, the more exciting part of this, to me at least, is that the hacker behind all this stepped forward. John Binns, a 21-year-old American currently living in Turkey. He reached out, took credit for it, and reached out to the Wall Street Journal for an interview.
Yes, and we were kind of burying the lead by starting with the boring stuff first, I guess. But basically, Binns, and it sounds like it's been fairly confirmed, his name was actually out there a little bit before he stepped forward as the person involved or behind the data breach. But there are a lot of different pieces of information about this. He did not say whether or not he actually sold the personal information that he was able to steal, but he had initially claimed he had access to info of about 100 million customers. So why would you say he did this? That's the big deal.
Yeah, we mentioned we don't know if he sold it or not, but that might be irrelevant to him as he has now succeeded in his goal of generating noise to get the attention of people, claiming that he was illegally kidnapped and tortured by the American government in Germany and Turkey. So we have a pretty interesting story one way or the other of either this guy exposing some CIA black sites in multiple countries or potentially showing the world that a crazy guy walking down the street mumbling to himself can break into one of the world's largest telecoms. So I'd say whether he's telling the truth or not, this is an interesting twist.
Yeah, so he says, first of all, he called T-Mobile's security, quote, awful, I believe. Lackluster, awful, all sorts of stuff. He says, I was panicking because I had access to something big. Their security is awful, as he said to the Wall Street Journal. He even provided evidence to the Journal proving that he was behind the attack through Telegram and told reporters that he originally gained access to T-Mobile's network through an unprotected router in July. So Sievert, going back to the CEO of T-Mobile, explained that the hacker behind the attack, quote, leveraged their knowledge of technical systems along with specialized tools and capabilities to gain access to our testing environments, and then used brute force attacks and other methods to make their way into other IT servers that included customer data. In short, this individual's intent was to break in and steal data, and they succeeded. And so that does seem to sort of jibe with the information that we hear from the bin side of the story too.
Right, so maybe we'll have a third episode once we know a little bit more about Ben's motivation and I guess the truth behind it, but we will find out more.
Yeah, so just putting a bow on what Ben was saying occurred, he did say that he got through their defenses and was able to get through with that unprotected router. Then over the course of another week, was able to get into more than 100 of the company's servers and then find the servers that contained the personal data of those millions of customers. And by August 4th, he had stolen all of those files. So as you said, T-Mobile has taken a few steps here. You mentioned Mandiant. They are also partnering long-term with another company called KPMG, which is a cybersecurity consulting firm. So those two firms are meant to sort of beef up T-Mobile's cybersecurity. And then for the customers, you get the 2 years of free identity protection, and you get recommended to sign up for T-Mobile's free scam blocking protection through Scam Shield. They don't even do that automatically for you, I guess. You have to.
Yeah, I guess not. If you are an Experian customer and a T-Mobile customer and all these other customers, you've probably got 3 or 4 different people protecting your credit at this point. So we're all very safe, I guess.
I wonder if that 2 years requires credit card information that auto renews if you don't remember that you have 2 years of identity theft protection service too. That'd be a nice little kicker, wouldn't it?
Right. Well, we'll find out, I'm sure.
But yes, so not so great on the T-Mobile side. It probably is just about as bad as it sounded when we were first talking about the story. Didn't turn out to be a little bit more minor than we said. If anything, maybe a little worse.
Right.
Now, headline number 2. Apple just traded your privacy for $15 billion. So this is a little bit of news buried in generally an opinion piece here, but it's interesting to discuss. So basically, we're talking about the relationship between Apple and Google, and that's what this story is about, for the most part.
Right. So I guess the real meat of this story comes in an agreement between Google and Apple. As you know, if you are an iPhone user, that your default search will be Google. You also are perhaps aware as an Apple customer that privacy is supposedly taken pretty seriously at Apple, which is in direct opposition to Google collecting, scraping, and compiling your private data to then sell you ads. So there's a bit of a dichotomy between what's being said and what's being done behind the scenes.
Yes, so the Safari browser that comes with all your iOS devices has Google as the default search engine, which benefits Google because if you have a default search engine, you're probably just going to go with that one. And so they get all of Apple's customers to use Google, and even though Apple doesn't collect the data and sell it or anything, Google can collect data from all of those people who use the web, which is what everybody does when they have a smartphone. So yes, it's sort of an end around on the privacy front, and Apple benefits because they make money from Google to to make Google the default search option. Apple had, on a regular basis, been receiving about $10 billion a year from Google for this privilege. According to this report, that payment is expected to jump to $15 billion this year and up to $18 billion next year. So, pretty good chunk of change.
Right, and this is all part of the business strategy of Tim Cook behind Apple is as they start to see...
I believe that's Tim Apple.
Oh, sorry, Tim Apple, CEO of Apple. So as iPhone sales I wouldn't say flattened out, but slowed, as everybody's got their 6 iPhones sitting in a drawer at this point, they've instead turned their profit-making focus to selling services. So things like making Google your default in exchange for that sweet cash, as you said, which is almost doubling in just a few years.
Yes, yeah, and it's also, if you think about it from Apple's perspective, they're going to have some sort of default search option. They probably recognize that everybody in the world uses Google to search for things, and they might seek it out anyway. But you would also think, and you can see why Google wants to pay for this, if Apple decided that they wanted to empower a DuckDuckGo, for instance, or somebody else that's, more heavily privacy focused as their default browser, they could, and that would probably chunk out a decent number of customers for Google too.
Right, and I'm honestly kind of surprised that Apple just hasn't developed their own search engine at this point. Yeah. So that seems the most straightforward solution here to me, but you might have seen billboards, and this is mentioned in the story, claiming that what happens on the iPhone stays on the iPhone, but I guess that doesn't quite jive with the fact that your iPhone is also connected to a network with the public internet. So
yeah.
What happens on your iPhone goes out to the rest of the world as soon as you click a button. So.
Just in a different way.
Right.
Yeah, so Apple does not collect user data for the purpose of showing personalized ads within its products. It doesn't track what you do across third-party apps and websites. So, yeah, they do make a pretty big deal about the privacy aspect. There have been stories in the past where law enforcement has implored Apple to unlock somebody's phone to be able to check some piece of evidence, and they're like,
nope, privacy. Which is at direct odds with this new plan they've got coming down the pipe to basically scan through everybody's iCloud photos, basically on a search for hashes that would match known images for child pornography, things of that nature. So a bit strange for them to say no to law enforcement in one instance, and then on the other hand, just kind of scan through every phone in their account to assist law enforcement. So
yes, so and that one has a noble goal behind it, but once that is being done, there's the old slippery slope argument. Once there's an algorithm that's combing through all of everyone's photos, then people will think about what else they might be able to use that for. So
right,
yeah.
And it is a noble goal. It's just a matter that Apple has also said no to other noble goals. So it kind of seems like they're choosing which noble goals they would and would not like to participate in.
It's almost like whatever benefits them might come to the fore in some way. And it's funny because the other little kicker that's mentioned in this piece is how much Steve Jobs absolutely hated the Android operating system, which is Google's phone operating system. So, in Steve Jobs' era, we wonder if this would have even happened. I don't know. I mean, potentially. There's still some pragmatism involved in the idea, as we said, of putting Google as your default search engine. But it's still interesting to know that, Jobs, not a fan of Android, saying that it was basically stolen technology, and the company that stole it would have, according to him, been Google. So
a bit of a continuing identity crisis for Apple the last couple decades.
Yes. Now, headline number 3. Diabolical ransomware gang calls it quits. So we used to have the segment Ransomware Reckoning, and now it seems like all those ransomware cells are going. So maybe it's Ransomware Cell Reckoning that we should start doing now. I don't know. The flurry of ransomware gangs have been slinking away from public view in recent weeks, and all giving out the decryption keys to their vast file encryption doings that they've done. So in this case, Ragnarok. Is the name, yeah.
So this is a hacking game that's been in the game since about 2019, doing the usual ransomware, encrypt, and extort sort of game plan. This previous Thursday, they released a free tool to all of their victims that would allow them to unlock their files and gain access to their computers again, all without asking for any money, and I guess as a big going-away present, as this group is apparently dissolving.
Yeah, and we've heard several of these kind of major ransomware cells leaving us over the past several months. In this story, they spotlight the Ziggy ransomware hackers, Avedon, Synac, and Phonix as well, some that I had not actually really heard of myself. But...
yeah, and actually heard of Ragnarok, so probably Our Evils, and about the only one that I would recognize here, that and Darkside.
And those two, apparently, I mean, we know that those two left us as well, but we've heard rumblings of them coming back. And according to this story, we'll just jump to that part. They've combined forces to create a new ransomware gang called Black Matter, I believe was the name. So that sort of foreshadows the idea behind all of this stuff, which is, and something that we've talked about before, they're gone, but not really, probably.
Right, yeah. So in name, they are gone, but there's really nothing stopping these people from packing their laptops up, walking next door to the next basement, and setting up a brand new hacker cell. So maybe just the names have changed. It's hard for me to believe that these guys saw the error of their way and went and, got jobs at the local grocery store or something. So
there'd be a lot more grocery workers then if that was the case,
right,
with all these ransomware cells.
So I guess the real question is the why we're seeing this mass quote-unquote exodus, if you want to call it that, since we're not sure if they're actually going anywhere, but I guess burying of heads in the sand.
Yeah, and the speculation has been and continues to be basically that they're doing it because the heat's a little bit too strong on them right now. Ziggy, one of the other ransomware groups that we mentioned that dissolved, actually said explicitly that their intention in backing down was to avoid law enforcement crackdowns and repercussions. There are both the law enforcement angles of this and also the isolation that they may be feeling from their old friends in the underground criminal communities as well. In this story, they point out that the popular Russian language cyber criminal forum administrators have announced in recent weeks that ransomware gangs would be barred from posting and coordinating their hacking schemes. And, maybe they just don't want to be pariahs and want to go straight because of that.
Yeah, maybe when even the other bad guys are calling you a bad guy, then you've gone too far.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't quite know that there's been enough big, huge headlines about all these people going to jail or being caught that I would think they would, make a decision that quickly, unless there's something going on behind the scenes that I don't know about.
Maybe they were kidnapped and tortured by law enforcement.
Could be. We'll find out.
Yeah.
We'll find out next time T-Mobile's hacked. But yeah, I don't quite foresee this being the end of it. Everybody's not just going to pack up and say, we'll leave those millions of dollars alone then.
Yeah. And it's not like ransomware has gone away, even in spite of all of these key players disappearing. So probably the names have been changed to protect the guilty, I guess, in this case, or the probably guilty. But it's not really goodbye. It's just smell you later, basically, for these groups.
And I also wonder if the recent headlines about the government being able to recover Bitcoin even after it's been paid, I wonder if that's kind of figuring into this, and everybody's in a holding pattern trying to see what's up with that before they start asking for Bitcoin again. And obviously, if you don't have a currency that you can safely deal in, then you kind of got to slow down your operations.
Yeah, and there are certainly plenty of other cryptocurrency options out there. So yeah, it could just be sort of take stock of the situation and how's the best way for us to do what we used to be able to do with Bitcoin, maybe a different way so that we can still maintain our anonymity, get that money, and be able to do whatever we want. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see.
There's also the potential angle of maybe some mysterious unnamed party in Russia telling them to cool their jets to get international scrutiny off their back. So there's a few different potential whys out there, but I don't think there's an exact period that this is over with.
Yeah, I wonder who that potential unnamed party would be. Does it rhyme with
you can't say that on the show.
Or gluten?
Trying to get our podcast taken down.
But yeah, so this story talks to different cybersecurity analysts, and they're basically just in speculation mode too in terms of why Ragnarok in this particular case has shuttered. Ragnarok, as you may know from the Thor MCU film, basically stands for like an end game, apocalypse kind of thing. So
you just can't get away from the superhero references, can you?
Yep. So maybe it's the Ragnarok for Ragnarok, but there could be some sort of next step there because ransomware is, rather than an end game, it's more like an infinity war, I would say.
There you go.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, and thanks very much to Mariam Baksh for joining us. Check out the links in the description for more information about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now however you listen to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available. And please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to get secure, stay secure.